Greetings. Right. Don't know how this review is going to come out because it's a very small figure, but I'm kind of going to do a bit of a history angle on it. I'm going to go into the history of this toy, the line it comes from, and its tenuous links with Transformers, because the toy I've got to show you today is not in fact a Transformer. I do have a few questions about it myself. I have sort of been researching the history on the toy, but I'm no expert on it by any means. So I will put links down below to relevant websites so you can click on, look at and go more in depth into the actual details of the figure and the toy line that it comes from. But anyway, I've got plenty of props around me because I'm going to need them for this. Okay, yes. You could say that this review is a YouTuber made me do it, but more on that later. First things first, let's start the history lesson off. Right, let's go back to a time before Transformers, the early 80s, and before Transformers sort of really got started, when Hasbro went to Japan and bought the rights to certain toy lines of the time, like the Micro Change line, the Diaclone line, toys from Bandai and a few other companies, bought them all together and then created the Transformer brand as we know it. There was other Japanese toys being produced in the years leading up to that from various companies for anime shows that were appearing on Japanese TV. Now, one of the big shows to come out in the early 80s was, of course, Super Dimensional Fortress Macross, i.e., the precursor to Robotech. It was huge, it was massive, and that was sort of the very early 80s, sort of like 1980, 82. And then after that, there was a couple of sort of spin-off shows that jumped up in its place. One of them was the Mospeda show. Which this guy came from, but I've only got him for an example. Yeah, but there was another show, and I'm going to have to go into my notes here. Right, it was called Special Armoured Battalion Dorvack. Now it had a number of different names. It was translated into different languages and shown various countries around the East, like Hong Kong and Taiwan and places like that. It was a co-production between Ashi Productions and Fuji TV. It ran for 36 episodes between the dates of the 7th of October 1983 and July the 6th, 1984. Now, this anime show had a toy line that ran in conjunction with it, as most cartoon shows do these days. And it was a range of toys by a company called Takatoku. And there was largely there was three main sort of transforming mechs from the series, which they did a whole series of scale models and toys of varying scales and details of these three figures. And they were the VV-54AR Mugen Caliber, the VH-64MR Ovalon Gazette, and the VT-61LC Bonaparte Tulcas. Now you're thinking, what's all this rubbish? Well, anyway, to cut a long story short, this anime series wasn't a huge success. In fact, it was a bit of a flop, and as a result, the toy line was too. The toys just were shelf warmers. They sat on the shelves. Nobody bought them, and Takatoku, as a result, went under. They went bankrupt because they just couldn't shift them. Now, that was the end of that. I mean, this series, this Special Armoured Battalion Dorvack, pretty much sank without trace. I mean, there was criticisms of the show saying, I'm paraphrasing something off the Wikipedia with this, a slow-moving storyline failed to engage the fans. So basically that's what it was. When they had other shows that was going on, they just had Macross, they'd also got Mospeda, and there was other shows which was getting the attention of fans. Dorvack didn't really float their boats. Anyway, that said, Takatoku failed as a company. They went down the toilet. That left their moulds for their toys up for grabs. And it was about this time that Hasbro came into Japan looking to buy up toy lines, and then they got the microchange line, they got the Diaclone line, and then they found these three figures from Takatoku. They had a look at the figures on show, and of course Mugen Caliber was a Jeep, and Ovalon Gazette was a helicopter. These two figures they liked the look of. They took them on board, and they became G1 Roadbuster and G1 Whirl. But the tank, the VT-61LC Bonaparte Tulcas, got left behind. And the reason being is because it was, as you'll see, in its robot mode, it's not very, it doesn't look very humanoid. It's like a tank standing up. It's very blocky, quite ugly looking. It's just a brick with legs, and they dropped it. They didn't pick it up. But the toy didn't go down without a fight. It was actually picked up by the molds were picked up by another toy company, Select Converters, who bought a number of the molds and re-released them in their own line later on, which I believe this particular toy is a version of, because I've got a bit of a doubt in my mind which version I've actually got, but I'm going on the assumption that I've got an original one, and that's what I'm saying. Anyway, so yes, Bonaparte Tulcas, and here it is. Now, it's a very little tanky thing. It's got this gun on top, which isn't a turret, but the guns do sort of move up and down a bit. That's pretty much all there is to it. And if you look, it's just a brick with tracks. Bit of a slope to the front. It's got this colour scheme is the original colour scheme from the show. The grey, the blue, and the orange. This particular one's got a few extra decals popped on it for some reason. I don't know why. But that's it. And it's a very simple thing. I'm not quite sure what scale this one is. It's supposed to be a 1/72nd scale. Now this thing's a 1/72nd scale as well, and you put them side by side and it looks a bit small, and when you put it into robot mode it's not as big as this guy, which leads me to believe that this is in fact the 1/100th scale version. But looking into my research, some of the smaller figures weren't actually released by Takatoku, because they went under before they could release the smaller scales, and these were the molds that Select Converters took up. So this is quite possibly one of the toys that was reproduced later on by Select. However, it's got all Japanese stamps on the bottom. There isn't a Select stamp on it, though I don't know whether these ones actually had a Select stamp. They just basically used the mould as was and just ran with it. But because it's in the original colours, leads me to believe that it is possibly an original one. But again, bit of a question mark over its authenticity as being an original toy. But anyway, going on. It's very simple. And transformation on this thing, it's quite simple. But strangely enough, it might be a simple toy, but it's actually got a decent amount of articulation given its robot form. Anyway, so where do you start? Now, these are the legs. You sort of pull them down. This thing's very floppy, by the way. So you pull it up, then you fold the legs and slide them back a little bit like that. And then there's these little orange mud flap things, which a bit of parts forming. You need to sort of pull them off. They're quite tight actually, and just put them to one side like so. You push that down. Now the arms, pull them out, rotate the shoulders forward, you then take the arm, pull it out, rotate it forward again, and then pull the fist out on that one. On this arm, you rotate it, pull it out and rotate it backwards, and then there's this little tapered flap that opens up and goes forwards. And then the final part, you bring the turret up and then fold the guns forward. Oh, and these little mudguardy things, there's these little slots on the top of the shoulder. Take the mudguard, it's got a slot in it, and you slot it in into there like that, and it just fills up this, just covers up this ugly bar sticking out from the shoulders. And there we go. And there is Bonaparte Tulcas in robot mode. Now, you can probably see why this wasn't picked up by the Hasbro executives for the Transformers line. I mean, you know, Transformers are supposed to look, you know, like that. I'm just using this as a size comparison. It's not much bigger than a Legends class, as you can see. Yeah, or, you know, like that. And there it is next to my Gakken 1/72nd scale Alpha V fighter, the Legios fighter. So yeah, and that's that. It's, some people look at this and think that's ugly looking brick, and I suppose it is. And being a 30-odd-year-old toy, it's super floppy. It's in a hard life. But that said, I think it's a neat little thing, because being so small and so old and so basic, it still has a decent level of articulation. It's got these shoulder joints which go forwards and backwards. They have a bicep rotation above the elbow, so you know you can bring the arm in, and it's the same on this side. It is very limited to what movement you can get because of the bulk of the thing, but it's got decently articulated elbows. The legs, you've got forwards and backwards on I suppose you could call it the hip joint. There's no knees on this, it's just got a foot, which now you can sort of get it in a walking pose, you know, like that. So it's not without its charms. And it keeps flopping around all over the place. But anyway, so that's the toy. And again, I'm not quite sure what scale this one is. I believe it's a 1/72nd scale, but it could be the 1/100th scale. I'm not 100% sure. It looks a bit small to be a 1/72nd scale, because if you put it next to that, as you can see, it's quite a bit smaller. But anyway, now I said earlier in the video that a YouTuber made me do it. Right, now going back to what I said earlier about it was from this Takatoku line of toys. Now, back in December, between Christmas and New Year, I was bored one day and decided, I know, I'm going to go and see Mr. Chris Six-Shot Changer. So I contacted him and says, you all right if I come over? And he says, yeah, sure. So I jumped in my car and drove over to where he lives in Ludlow, and I paid him a visit. And if you don't believe me, here's a couple of pictures I took while I was there. And yeah, we had a bit of a, I took some of my Carbot toys over to let him have a look at and let him have a play with, just trying to, you know, convert him into the ways of the Carbot. But you know, we sat down and had a good chat about stuff, and then Chris comes out with this thing about this Grail of his, this Grail toy that he wants. Now, he said, do you remember those toys that Bandai did, you know, back in the early 80s? That now, he said Bandai. Now, there's this misconception that G1 Whirl and G1 Roadbuster came from Bandai toys. That's not entirely correct. It's actually this Takatoku. However, some of Takatoku's products were bought out by Bandai and used later on. They, you know, the Veritech fighter that became G1 Jetfire was originally a Takatoku designed toy, but the mold was bought out by Bandai when you know, Robotech started up in the sort of mid-80s. But anyway, that's a little bit of a myth dispelled for you. Yeah, so he was going on about these, and he said, he knew about, you know, the Whirl and Roadbuster, but he had heard about this third figure. And he says, well, there was a third one. There was this tank. He says it was a really ugly looking tank, and it never got picked up by, you know, Hasbro at the time. But Chris, Mr. Six Shot Changer, has a theory, and his theory is this: that he reckons this thing, had it been picked up by Hasbro back in the day, would have become G1 Impactor. That's his theory, because you think about it. These guys got picked up. Obviously, these are the Generations versions. I haven't got the original ones. These are the Generations versions of Whirl and Roadbuster, and we all know they're very, you know, awesome characters in, you know, in the fiction, in IDW. They started life in the Marvel G1 comic, which, like I said, Target 2006. And the Wreck and Rule story, where we got introduced to the likes of Whirl and Roadbuster. And yeah, so these two got picked up, but they were both became wreckers, because those two toys got released, not in the UK, we didn't get them in the UK, but they didn't come out with the original wave of G1 toys. They came out a bit later on, and we got the jump starters, and I think Whirl and Roadbuster were released in America roughly about the same time. Don't quote me on that. But anyway, that was the time that they were picking, you know, Hasbro was buying this stuff up. But had they bought this up, then he might have become Impactor. And Chris's theory about this is quite interesting. Now, I happen to have my Spartan here, and we're looking for similarities. I mean, obviously this is more on the IDW design rather than the G1. But he thought, one of his theories was this: the fact that one of his arms is a weapon, and it's his right arm that's weaponized. Now, we all know that Impactor here is famous for having his spear gun on his right arm. So that's one similarity. Now, the other thing that's interesting is, in the G1 comic, we're first introduced to Impactor, right? And obviously then he's training with the Wreckers for Operation Volcano. And then there's also this bit where he gets beaten up by the Triple Changers, who are disguised as Decepticons. But anyway, my point I'm trying to make is G1 Impactor never transformed. He was only in the comic for a couple of issues, And then he, well, we all know what happened. And then he died, right? He got shot by Macabre, who was actually aiming at Emirate Zaran, and he took the shot and died. So he only lasted a couple of issues. He did come back, however. City of Fear, where he came back as a zombie. And then again, a couple of issues later, or an issue or two later, he sacrificed himself and died for a second time. So he's I mean, okay, the only Autobot who's died more times than Impactor is Optimus Prime. But anyway, throughout all this, he never transformed. We never saw his alt mode in his G1 form. Now, somebody somewhere, I've seen it, I don't know where it is, I've seen it on the internet, somebody did an artist's impression of what they thought Impactor's G1 mode would look like, and strangely enough, it kind of looked like that, only purple and with the gun on the top. So maybe, just maybe, had this guy been picked up, he might, just might, have been G1 Impactor. And that is Chris Sixshot Change's theory on the subject. And after he told me this, I thought, well, I've got to do some research in this, and I started my initial research into it. I found pictures, Japanese pictures of the original trio, and it's only just lately I've gone back into researching it and I found a lot more stuff. And again, some of the links that I've discovered I will put down below in the description section. And I've learnt a lot more about these toys, and thinking about what he said, I reckon there's a possibly a bead of truth to this. Yes, this thing is not really suitable to become a bipedal robot, such as, you know, that. But with some remoulding, if you did a bit of work on this, remoulded a few bits, you know, did away with this, put right, let's do it. Right, so, you know, you put that on top for starters, and then when you transform him, I don't know how this is going to work. Right, so stick that on there, stick that on there, and then put that on there. I know this thing's totally the wrong scale, but yeah, G1 Impactor. Anyway, so that's Chris's theory, and I reckon there's some credence to it. I reckon it's quite possible that had things gone a little differently, then perhaps, maybe, this toy would have been picked up, remoulded, you know, modified, and become G1 Impactor. So with that in mind, I decided I've got to get one of these, and that's why I bought it. That is why I bought it. The thing is, this is the small scale one, as you can tell. They did do bigger ones of these. They did some that are, you know, more this size. Maybe there's a, well, there's supposed to be, according to my research, there's supposed to be a 1/24th scale one, a 1/55th scale, a 1/72nd, and a 1/100th scale toy. So they did a variety of different scales. They did plastic kits as well. I think the plastic kits were, the 1/100th scale was the plastic kit. The toys were the 1/72nd and the 1/55th scale. But so yeah, that's why I bought it, because it's a what if. What if this toy was G1 Impactor? That's why I bought it. And there are other, like I said, there are other scales of this. There is a bigger one. There's a bigger scale one. There's a 1/55th scale one. So there are ones that are bigger than this that will be more akin to, you know, the size of the figures that it's more likely to look like. But it never happened, and all we've got left of what was is this thing. But I still wanted to get one, because I'm not above, you know, buying rarities and oddities such as this. It doesn't bother me. I mean, it's a little tiny thing. It's old. It's ancient. It's rattly. I paid over 30 quid for this, but yeah, I don't mind. I don't mind because it's very similar to this, and I used to have one of these when I was a kid, and I actually loved it to bits. And the fact that this is a 30-year-old toy, it's got history, and even though that history that it had wasn't particularly successful, it's still, you know, I can sit down for half an hour and talk about the history of this toy and the line that it represents. So yeah, that is my review of this thing. The Special Armoured Battalion Dorvack Variable Tank 61LC Bonaparte Tulcas 1/72 scale. So yeah, that's been my review of this thing, and I hope you've found it enlightening. Like I said, it's probably a complete farce of a review. I didn't want to go so deep into the history. But I'm going to put links below to some other websites where you can, you know, read up on it a bit more better, in more detail. So that's been me, TFR Wilderness. Hope you'll catch me next time. Ta-da.